Um, but what does it mean to be independent but not isolated? And I think that this was something that I was looking for when I first came across Inner Space and the Brahma Kumaris, who are responsible for running the Inner Space information centers and meditation centers around the planet. And that was 35 years ago. Actually, it's 35 years ago next month. So 20th of August 1990 was the date that I first walked into the meditation center here in Cambridge. And it was because I was off work with stress and my doctor had signed me off, and I'd been to see the psychotherapist, and the psychotherapist didn't seem to know what was going on. So I was, a little bit at a loss to know what to do. And we ended up going to the meditation center partly because it talked about something called Raja Yoga, and we thought yoga, relaxation, this might be helpful. What really struck me was an understanding of the self that was, that there's a saying that a mind once expanded by an original thought never returns to its previous dimensions. And that certainly sums up my experience that evening on the 20th of August, 1990, when my wife Alison and I went along to the meditation center, not really knowing what to expect or even what we were looking for. But I was certainly in need of something to help me understand why it was that even though apparently my life was in great shape, I'd got a good job and a good qualifications and working for a good company here in Cambridge, good salary, company car, we got a house, we're paying off a mortgage, all the kind of things that if you have an Excel spreadsheet of all the things that you're supposed to be able to tick off in order to be a happy and fulfilled person, all the boxes were there and they were all ticked. But there was something that wasn't quite right. And it really came down to this issue of, can you be independent, interdependent, and not isolated? And it happened really around the precipitating event that had me off work, suffering from stress, and signed off by my GP, and then going and seeing the psychotherapist, was a conflict between two roles that I played then. So our son Alexander was born in 1990 on the 16th of May. It was coming up for his first, 1989, 16th of May. He was coming up for his first birthday on the 16th of May, 1990. We'd arranged a party, fine, play the role of dad, be a good dad. Didn't feel I had a very close relationship with my own dad. I mean, he was around and fine, but my mother wore the trousers in the household. And so my dad was a little bit in the background. Plus, he also suffered from deafness, partly congenital, which I've inherited. I've got my hearing aids in this evening, and partly because he worked in factories. And in those days, even if they provided you with ear protection, you didn't wear it because you were macho and you didn't want to look like you were a wimp by wearing ear defenders. So consequently, I sort of felt that I wanted to be a good dad to Alexander, but I didn't really know what that meant, because I didn't have a particularly powerful role model of what I thought of as being, good parenting on the male side from my father. So that role was really important, but also the role of my professional work was really important. And as life would have it, what happened was I was obliged to be at a client meeting in Holland on the day of his birthday. And so there was this conflict between me as the dad wanting to be here in Cambridge for his birthday party and me, the consultant, engineer, professional, wanting to be at the client meeting and needing to be at the client meeting. It was a project I was running. It was a big project, a big client. And so there was this real feeling of, it was literally like being torn into two pieces, that the dad wants to go in this direction and the consultant, the professional, the job wants to go in the other direction. And I couldn't resolve that. But the young lady who was giving my wife and I the introduction to the philosophy behind the Brahma Kumaris and Inner Space said, "Oh, that's easy." And I was stunned, right? Because I'd just been to see the guy who ran psychotherapy at Cambridge University Teaching Hospital, and he seemed clueless as to what was going on. And here's somebody who's got no medical qualifications telling me it's easy. So at this point, I'm all ears. I want to know, what does she know that makes her think that this is an easy problem to solve? And she said these words that have stayed with me now for nearly 35 years. She said, "Your problem is you don't know who you are." And I said, I think I do. I mean, I have certificates. I can bring them in and show you. And she said, and this was the key point, she said, "No, you think that you are Alexander's dad. You think you're Alison's husband. You think you're Sadie and Arthur's son. You think you're Mary and Anne's brother. You think you're the consultant who works for the innovation lab. You think you're the friend of the various friends you have. But, and here's the key point, those are all roles you play. And you are the actor who plays those roles." And in that moment, it was like somebody just turned on a 50 kilowatt light bulb. And in that moment, I actually had the experience of a shift in myself. It was like I moved back a step inside myself and literally experienced myself to be the actor. And I could see I put on these different masks, the masks of Geoff the dad, Geoff the husband, Geoff the son, Geoff the brother, Geoff the friend, Geoff the professional. And yet there's only the one me in there who is doing all this shifting from one mask to another. And that for me is the total key to tonight's topic, because I can only be independent when I'm able to step back into that awareness of being the actor playing the role. As soon as I lose myself in the role, then how I perform the role is dictated not just by me, but by the other people that interface with that role. So if I am in the role of Geoff the dad, then if Alexander does well at school and his teacher says he's a really good student, he works really hard, I feel a glow. I feel, oh, great, my son is getting praise from his teacher. Or if the teacher sends a message to say, can you come and fetch your son home? He's been put on suspension for 2 weeks for fighting with somebody, whatever. Then I feel, oh my God, why would you behave like that and show me up? Right. So it's the entanglement of my sense of who I am with the role that I play that causes me to be dependent upon the behavior of other people. If my wife cooks something that I like, great, wonderful. If she cooks something that she likes and I don't like, how do I feel about that? Does my state of inner calm and peace, stability, serenity depend on what's on the menu? And do I then feed into that relationship this sense that you don't really care about me because you cook food that you like, that I'm not particularly keen on? And so you can see how easy it is for us to get sucked into identifying with the role, such that the relationship that we're in through that role becomes a source of of suffering as well as happiness. And the weird thing is that when we're able to step back and stay in this awareness of being the actor, playing the different roles, putting on the different masks, and playing the different parts we have on the stage of life, then there's actually an inner state of calm and peace and serenity that feels very, very solid and very secure. And that's where the sense of independence comes from, that doesn't lead to isolation, because it's not that I have to withdraw myself from interacting with other people in order to avoid the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. All I have to do is be able to make that subtle step backwards into inner space, make that subtle step backwards, and from that vantage point, then be able to interact with others in a more resourceful, a more empowered, a more independent, but not isolated way. So, really, that's the essence of the whole topic, I think, of how to be more independent. but not become isolated. I talked about actor and stage, and that's something that actually has been understood for a very long time in various philosophies. The one that we tend to be most familiar with in the West is from Shakespeare in the 17th century in the play As You Like It, where in Act 2, Scene 7, there's this line, all the world's a stage and men and women are players. We have our exits and our entrances, and in our time, we play many parts. And so when I'm saying what we're doing is we are acting through the roles, we're putting on the masks of the different roles and playing those different roles. What I'm not saying is we're putting on an act. I'm not saying we are pretending to be something that we're not. What I'm saying is that this is actually the place where our solid foundation is to be found behind the mask of the different roles. And if I'd have been able to make that step back all the way back in 1990, I would have been able to say, okay, from this vantage point, I can see that Geoff, the dad, wants to be at Alexander's birthday party. And I can see that Geoff, the consultant, wants to be at the client meeting. Now, how can I have my cake and eat it too? How can I, or jelly and ice cream, since it's a birthday party for a 1-year-old, how can I do both? And the obvious answer is you have the birthday party on a different day. He's 1 year old. He's not going to know that you're having his birthday party on the 17th of May or the 18th of May or the 20th of May instead of the 16th. And yet, when I'm caught up in the identity of being the dad and I've got all of this emotion running through me that it's important to me to be a good dad because I didn't really have that sense that I had a strong relationship with my own dad, and I didn't have any brothers. I just had two elder sisters, and I had a mum who, was very strong-willed, if I want to be polite. I didn't really have the sense of how to do that, but it was important to me. And so you can see all the emotional entanglement with the role that occurs. And then, of course, my inner state depends then on how those entanglements play out. If it's at work and I've got my identity tied up in my work, then if my boss comes in and he's happy with me, I feel good. If he comes in and he's not happy with me, then I'm a bit worried. Am I going to be fired? Am I in trouble? Will I need to work extra hours in order to make up for what he sees as the failings that he sees in me? And again, this was something that I had to encounter an early stage on my journey. After I'd started to work with these ideas, the company that I worked for, Innovation Lab here in Cambridge, they had they'd been lined up for a very, very large project, and they decided that they would bring in a specialist project manager from outside on a fairly high salary at a fairly senior level in order to manage this project. And the organization had quite a collegiate, collaborative culture. When I moved to Cambridge to join the company, I'd previously worked in engineering jobs in the BBC and in British Aerospace. And both of those were fairly traditional, sterile, top-down, command and control, hierarchical organizations. I sometimes joke that they took the worst of the ideas about management from the Church of England and the British Army and put them together, and that was what we were subjected to. And when I came to the Innovation Lab, I used to describe it as being like having died and gone to heaven, because it was collegiate, collaborative, first name terms. Even the managing director, we knew him as Paul. We didn't know him as Mr. Orton or Dr. Orton, as he was a PhD. He had an open door policy. And I always remember that the only really strong cultural rule the organization had was that if you see something that you think isn't right and you don't speak up, then you're letting the company down. And in most organizations, if you see something wrong and you do speak up, you get sidelined or ejected, or, we hear about all these whistleblowers in organizations who get penalized. So this guy, I'll call him Austin, came in from outside to run this major project. And during the period between him leaving his previous company and joining the innovation lab, uh, it turned out that we hadn't been awarded the project. And so we ended up with this senior guy that we'd recruited. So we needed to find a job for him. And at the time, I was a group leader running a group of digital systems engineers. And the division manager, who was my boss, who had been groomed within the company and had the company culture, he left for another job. And so somebody in their wisdom in the management suite decided that, hey, look, we've got a senior person here and we've got a senior hole in the organization. Obvious solution, put this Austin into this role. That's what they did. And so I ended up with Austin as my boss. And it was a very challenging experience. I don't know why I was going to say traumatic. I suppose it was traumatic. But it's a very challenging experience because when he came on board, one of the first things I did was I arranged a meeting with him to explain to him what was in the plan that we had agreed with the previous boss for that year for the group that I was running. Because it seemed sensible that if he's now responsible for my group and three other groups, then I should be very clear with him about what we're planning to do and make sure he's in agreement. So I arranged the meeting and I explained to him what we've got in the plan. And his response was something like, yeah, well, I don't pay you in order for me to make your decisions for you. And I'm like, well, that's not very supportive. No. I would have thought he would have been interested in me running a quarter of his business, what we're doing. But if he seems to think it's up to me to decide that and he's not interested, then I suppose I better go off with the group and do what we think we should do. So that was the approach, which I did for a month or so. And then I got called into his office. I can laugh about it now. It wasn't funny at the time. I got called into his office and he said, why are you working on this project and why is this thing going on over here in your group? And I said, well, look, here's the plan that I wanted to show you a month ago, but you weren't interested. And that was what I said we were doing. And he said, I expect you to come and discuss these things with me before you do them. So I'm in this situation where I tried to discuss with him before we were doing something, what we were going to do, and got told, yeah, I don't pay you in order to make your decisions for you. And then when I made the decisions, he then like, you should come and talk to me before you make these decisions. And so it was this strategy that seemed designed to completely undermine me in my role. In brackets, a few years later, he and I were on a management retreat in somewhere in the States, in the parent company that we work for. I was no longer working for him. And he told me at this management retreat, there was a bit of a chit chat session. And as it happened, I got paired off with him. So there's me and Austin. And he said to me, referring back to the time that we worked together and this difficulty that I experienced, he said, one of the things that you need to understand about me, Geoff, is that when I was very early in my career, I worked with the boss who everybody was impressed by. Now, what he actually meant was everybody was totally scared of. And he said this boss had said to him, Austin, if 80% of the people who work for you don't hate your guts, you're not doing your job properly. If 80% of the people who work for you don't hate your guts, you're not doing your job properly. Right? Not the most enlightened management philosophy, but anyway, Austin took this on board and decided to aim for this 80% of people hating his guts, which he overshot by about 20%, because as far as I can remember, everybody hated his guts. He was an overachiever, at least on that metric. It really shocked me to understand that somebody could have modeled their management philosophy on this idea that whatever you do, make sure that 80% of people hate your guts. But the reason I'm going into this and explaining this situation with Austin is I was struggling to know how do I deal with this. And I asked one of my friends who was involved with the Brahma Kumaris. She used to be responsible for the retreat centre over in Oxford. Her name is Joyce. She passed away a few years ago. And I was chatting with her, and she was saying she got quite a strong Birmingham accent. So she said, "Do you just got to see it as a game?" And I said, "Oh, it doesn't feel like a game when you're in front of Austin. It feels like you're completely having your guts ripped out." And so she said, "Well, you need to understand the nature of the game." I won't do the accent anymore, particularly in case there's any people from Birmingham on the call offended by my. Just I, in my defence, I was born and raised in Coventry, and we're quite close to Birmingham, so there was always a little bit of rivalry between Coventry and Birmingham. Um, so Joyce said, "What you need to do is you need to understand the nature of the game." And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Look, here's how the game plays out. You and Austin are both actors. So that's that same underlying metaphor again, right? And you, Geoff, are playing the role of the group leader who runs the digital systems group. And Austin is the actor who is playing the role of the division manager who looks after the digital systems group and three other groups. Now, the game is this. Whenever you encounter Austin, he's trying to pull you out of the awareness of being the actor, in spiritual language, the soul. He's trying to pull you into the awareness of being the role of the group leader. Why is he doing that? Because in his position as the division manager, if he can pull you into the role consciousness of group leader, he's in the role consciousness of being division manager. He has a hierarchical superiority over you. And that then makes you dependent. I mean, literally, the word dependent means to hang underneath, like to suspend. To depend means to hang underneath. So if he can make me dependent by pulling me into the awareness of the role, and the way he pulls me into the awareness of the role is not by saying, you're the role, you're the role, it's by treating me as though I'm the role. So this is Austin's part in the game, as Joyce called it. And if he manages to pull me into the awareness of the role, he scores a point. And this is all something that I'm having to work with internally. My role in the game is to remain aware that I am a soul, I am the actor, and that Austin is also the soul, the actor, who is playing the role of division manager. And so if I interact with Austin and he says something, provokes me in some way, which is clearly intended to pull me into role consciousness, and I notice him doing it, I notice him playing that game, and I can see, aha, but like a chess player, I know why you've moved that piece over there. You're hoping that I will do this. If I can see that what he's doing is saying something, interacting with me in a certain way that's designed to pull me into role consciousness that then makes me dependent on him. And I notice that, and I don't allow myself to be pulled into role consciousness. If I stay in my soul consciousness, I get the point. And it completely reframes the interaction away from how it was previously experienced, which is, oh no, I'm going to be interacting with Austin. Is he in a good mood? Is he in a bad mood? Um, Several of the people who worked in our division, I remember one guy, Chris, his name was, who was the sales guy for the division. He found it so difficult to work with Austin. And literally, he would say, I can tell if I'm going to have a good day or if I'm going to have a bad day the moment I drive into the car park. Because if Austin's car is in his parking space, I know I'm going to have a bad day. If Austin's car is not in his parking space, it means he's away at a client meeting and I'm going to have a wonderful day. That's how people can affect our experience if we are dependent. And we become dependent because we end up being role conscious. And the only way to become independent without becoming isolated, without running away, resigning, going and hiding under a rock somewhere, the only way is to step out of role consciousness into soul consciousness, to step back behind the role into the stance of being the actor. So what happened was over a period of a few weeks, I was interacting with Austin and I was remembering, okay, each time I encounter him, this is this game going on. And the first few encounters, he would probably score more points than me because he would, I was just so habitually used to falling into role consciousness that he would manage to trigger that. He would say something like, um, or he'd call me into his office. So first of all, that's all, so do I get pulled into, oh, I'm going to get told off here? Or do I think, haha, this is an opportunity to practice my newfound skills? And so he would call me in his office and say, that presentation that you did last week, I wasn't very happy with it. And again, I'm able to say, okay, is this trying to pull me into this? Because him not being happy with it is that hierarchical thing. He's trying to make me dependent. He's trying to make my state inside myself dependent on him, what he thinks of me, how he treats me. So I can see that going on. And so I said to him, what was it that you didn't like about the presentation last week? And he said, well, when you talked about this particular thing, I think you missed the opportunity to say this or this or this. And I was really surprised because there was actually something useful in what he said. And that was the first time ever in any interaction with him, he'd actually said anything to me that was useful. Or was it? Was it that I was just so much in this attitude of him being the worst possible manager that I'd ever encountered that I could never see that there was actually some merit in some of the things that he said? And once you see there's some merit in this person who otherwise you think is a complete idiot or completely unreasonable, they have an attitude problem or an aptitude problem. As soon as you see that there's something of merit in the other person, your attitude shifts, and it's much easier to stay in that awareness of seeing the qualities of the human being, the qualities of the actor behind the mask and behind the role that they're playing. And so I was blown away because from being in an experience where for several months, every encounter with Austin was uncomfortable at best, and sometimes extremely painful and traumatic. Just with this understanding of the game, I was able to shift within a few weeks to the point where we were having productive interactions. Our interactions would be come out, scoring 5 points in the sense that there were 5 times that he'd tried to pull me into role consciousness and I'd seen it and not fallen for the trap, and he'd score 2 points. So there were twice when I got caught out and, rats, I'll be alert to that one next time. It's just a way that it gave me this new frame of reference and a new way of interacting that was very empowering, because what it did was it made me more independent, but I didn't need to isolate myself. And I think this is the key. If we can understand every time we interact with someone, we're interacting with another actor on the stage, as Shakespeare said, playing their part. And when we're aware that we are the actor, we adopt the identity of being the actor and we assign the identity to the other person of being the actor. Otherwise, it's I adopt the identity of being the husband and I assign the identity of being the wife to my wife. I adopt the identity of being the father and I assign the identity of being the son to my son. And this is a process that's going on all the time. I was very useless, I think is the right word, at meditation when I first started to practice it. My mind was just too active. But what I could do and what I did do and what was my anchor and my foundation in those early months and the first few years was that I would be attentive to who is the me that has shown up in this situation. Am I seeing the other person as an actor playing their role, or am I seeing them as the role? Because if I'm seeing them as the role, then I'm caught up in my role too. There's this correspondence between the identity I adopt and the identity I assign. And so what this does is when we develop this muscle of being soul conscious, of being aware of the self as the actor, seeing others as actors, it builds positive, healthy, productive relationships, even with people that we wouldn't necessarily choose to spend a lot of time with if we had a choice. I wouldn't have wanted to socialize with Austin, but we were able to work together productively because I was able to be less affected. I was becoming less dependent on his opinion of me, his attitude towards me, and the number of times that he was just trying to keep up his score of 80% of people hating his guts. Because once you realize that there's that kind of irrationality going on, it's a very different interaction. And so I think, as I was reflecting on this topic before this evening, one of the people who was coming to mind was the woman who was really my spiritual director over those 35 years, the 30 odd years at least of it. So I first met her within a few months of coming in contact with the Brahma Kumaris in 1990. And she very quickly sort of latched onto me. And so she took me to one side once and said, look, if you want any advice, just come to me. And she mostly spoke Hindi, so I would go through a translator. And she particularly said, talk with this sister who will translate for you and whatever. And that was a relationship that was very, very powerful and very rewarding from 1990 until pretty much until she passed away, aged 104 in 2020, by which time she would actually become the administrative head of the Brahma Kumaris globally. And when I was thinking about tonight, she came to my mind because of something that she'd said about freedom. And I think freedom, the Americans wanted independence in 1776 because they wanted freedom, right? It's their big thing. The land of the free, the home of the brave and the land of the free. And she said something which came to my mind as I was reflecting on this for this evening, which is she described freedom and she said, freedom is not that you can just do whatever. And she said, freedom is no one can make me do that which is wrong. And no one can prevent me from doing that which is right. No one can make me do that which is wrong, and no one can prevent me from doing that which is right. And the immediate question that then raises is, but how do I know what is wrong? And how do I know what is right? And the answer to that is you discover it as you cultivate this awareness of yourself as the soul, as the actor playing the different parts that you play through the different masks that you are called to put on in your actions and interactions. And as you cultivate that awareness, what you tap into is something which we don't tend to talk about much these days in Western society, which is your conscience. Your conscience becomes much more clear to you about what's the right thing to do and what's the things to avoid doing. And so then you see when other people like Austin are trying to pull you into doing that which is wrong or prevent you from doing that which is right. And for me, I think that this really is at the core of tonight's topic of independence without being isolated, because to be independent is to be free, not to be free to just do whatever, but to be free to do what is right and to not allow other people to stop you from doing what is right and not allow them to make you do that which is wrong. So I think really that's come to a kind of natural point at which to perhaps invite you to reflect for a few moments in a meditation commentary. And then we can pick up some of the Q&A, which, as Artie said at the beginning, please put your questions into either the Q&A box or the chat box at the bottom of your screen. So, what's meditation? Meditation for inner space for the Brahma Kumaris is really the practice of building that muscle of soul consciousness, of becoming more able to remain stable in the awareness of being the actor, not being pulled into role consciousness. How do we do that? We do that in reflection, using our thoughts in a way that enables us to cultivate that awareness, to deepen that sense of self as the actor, the one playing the parts through the masks, to develop that muscle. And so I just invite you for a few moments to join me in a reflection on that. You could call it a meditation commentary, but it's really just a guided reflection, which I would just ask you to start by relaxing and taking a couple of deep breaths. It's a good way to get yourself centered. And as you breathe out, just consciously let go of any tension in your body, in your hands and in your shoulders. Any tension in your legs and your feet. And any tension in your jaw. Just let it all relax. And then take a final deep breath. And just for the next few moments, as you sit here, reflect on this understanding of the self as an actor on the stage of life. Different scenes appear and disappear in front of you. You're called to put on the mask of a friend when you interact with friends. The mask of a family member when you interact with family members. The mask of your work persona when you're at work. And yet always in all these situations, behind those masks, right here in the center of your being, is you, the actor, the one who is called upon to put on the different masks and play the different parts. We often don't spend much time getting to know who am I behind the masks. It requires what's sometimes called in philosophy an inward turn, a turning of the attention inwards to see what's going on inside the self. To see what is the identity that I'm adopting in this moment. What are the identities that I am assigning to other people I'm interacting with? Just now, in this moment, on this Zoom call, what identity are you assigning to Geoff Are you seeing me as the speaker from Cambridge with 35 years of experience, that biodata that Artie read? Or are you seeing me as the actor playing the part of Geoff? And as you make that subtle shift from seeing me as Geoff to seeing me as the actor playing the part of Geoff, you cannot help but make that shift inside yourself from adopting the identity of being an audience member or a participant on this Zoom call to adopting the identity of being the actor playing your part as a member of the community that has come together on Zoom this Friday evening, the 4th of July, to discover true independence without being isolated. And so with that, I'd like to invite Artie to rejoin us and pose the questions.
Thank you for taking us through the talk and the steps that we can take, but also the meditation. That was it allowed me to breathe deeply within the soul. So thank you. Now, the first question came in quite early in on your talk, but I'll ask it to see if there's anything you wish to add. Thank you so much. I'd like to understand a bit better how to make the distinction and how to avoid the trap of embracing our roles as our identities.
Yeah, it's a really good question. The analogy that I like to use, there's 2 or 3 analogies that I use a lot. And one of them is the analogy of the pig. Um, I partly like it because it can be a bit provocative, the idea of what would a pig mean. But it comes from something that I heard at a lecture here in Cambridge. It was actually at the university in 1997. A Canadian management scholar by the name of Gareth Morgan, originally Welsh, as you can tell by the name, came to Cambridge and did a talk. And he used this analogy of the pig. And he said, he asked us, what is a pig? And it was kind of drawn out thing. But the essence of it was this. When a veterinary surgeon looks at a pig, what they see is a patient. When a pig farmer looks at a pig, what they see is money. And when a butcher looks at a pig, what they see is meat. Now, the pig isn't changing at all. The pig's just being the pig. So what's going on is it's the awareness of the person observing the pig that makes the pig appear to be the way it is. And Gareth Morgan summed this up. He said, we don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. So there's this function inside the self of adopting an identity, the identity of the vet or of the pig farmer or of the butcher. And it's in the adopting of that identity that it makes the pig look like a patient or money or meat. So to answer the question, whenever we encounter somebody, whenever we encounter a situation, a circumstance in this great drama of life, that inward turn is to notice, what am I seeing? Because what am I seeing is telling me, who am I being? So the analogy of the pig, if I'm seeing the patient, I must be in the awareness of being the vet. If I'm seeing money, I must be in the awareness of being the farmer. If I'm seeing meat, the awareness of being the butcher. Every time we encounter someone or a scene or a situation, it's an opportunity to check, what's the awareness that I've turned up in? And as you do that, you begin to see that not only can you see the awareness that you've turned up in, but in seeing that awareness, you automatically are subtly stepping back behind it. For me to notice that I have turned up in the awareness of the group leader and I've put Austin into the awareness of being the division manager, I have to be able to observe that. And if I'm observing that, I'm not caught up in it. So that's the mechanism, that's the practice, that's the way we build the muscle, is to pay attention, to notice, oh, look, I seem to have turned up in this awareness. I feel this way. Oh, I must be turned up in, because we can't see directly what the awareness is. We can only see its effect. There's a saying in India that the knife cannot cut itself, the eye cannot see itself, the tooth cannot bite itself. And in the same way, I cannot see what the awareness is I've turned up in, except by the way things appear to be to me externally. So that's the metaphor that I always go for, is the pig. It's okay, if I'm interacting with someone, what am I seeing going on? Am I judging them? Am I saying, oh, they're not very good at that? Okay, so if that I'm saying they're not very good at that, what's the awareness I've turned up in? Oh, I'm comparing, I'm competing, I'm complaining. So these are the kind of signals that you start to notice. Ah, this is me caught up in my role, as opposed to seeing the other as a soul and therefore being in the awareness of being the soul. So that's the practical application.
Thank you. The next question that has come in, and I've already, here we go. How can you manage it, I guess, in being independent when you don't score the points in a relationship over and over again? So you are constantly pulled into the role you are playing.
Yeah. So, first thing to do is to congratulate yourself for noticing that the other person just beat you. I suppose we should use a tennis analogy since it's Wimbledon. They just beat you 6-love, 6-love, 6-love. And noticing it, and as you can see, just noticing it, I'm kind of quite light about it, because it's not like, oh, I failed. It's like, okay, I'm noticing the score. The score is not brilliant, right? Okay, plenty of room for improvement. That's a good thing. So having the attitude that I'm here to learn, I'm not here to be perfect. I'm here to grow. I'm not here to prove anything. I'm not here to win. No, the purpose of that game is not to win. The purpose of the game is to improve my score. So something that I can do, and something that I have done in the past and would definitely recommend, is it's a simple thing that if you think about an actor going onto a stage, they don't just go onto the stage. The thing they do before they go onto stage on opening night is they do rehearsals. So here's the rehearsal. You know that this particular person that you interact with, they know that your coded destruct sequence is 4731. And the moment you interact with them, the first thing they do is they press 4. And before you've even had a chance to draw breath, they press 7. And you think, oh, please don't press 3. And as you think it, they've pressed 3. And you just know they're going to press 1. And they press 1 and you detonate. You saw it coming, you predicted it, you ended up in the trap. So in your rehearsal, which is when you're not in front of the person and they therefore haven't got access to your buttons, in your rehearsal, in your quiet time, back at your home and away from the interaction, wherever it is, or maybe if it's the problem is at home, then somewhere else where you're away from the interaction, visualize yourself going into that circumstance and seeing the other person press 4 and then press 7 and press 3 and press 1. But see yourself not being so triggered. That you're not going to get perfection in one step, right? You're not going to go from being completely triggered every time you encounter them to totally free of any triggering within one step. But what you can realistically expect is that in this practice, in this rehearsal, to see yourself not being so affected, not being so caught up. And what you discover is something that sports psychologists have known for decades, which is virtual practice in your mind is almost as good as actual practice on the court. They've done this with basketball players and improving their shots. And those who go on the court improve. Those who just visualize going on the court also improve, maybe about 80% as much as the people who actually went on the court. So in this rehearsal, what you're doing is you're seeing yourself going into the encounter, you're visualizing it, you're noticing what it normally feels like, but you're seeing yourself not being so affected by it. And that is building the muscle. And what you then discover is when you do go into the situation, yeah, they probably still go through 4731, but you're not so anxious beforehand. You're not so building yourself up to explode. And when you do feel triggered, you're not so extremely triggered. And then you start to notice that they don't tend to trigger you so much. It takes longer. There's a longer gap between you being triggered by something and the next time you're triggered by it. You might be tired. Something might have irritated you, something might have gone wrong, eaten something that doesn't agree with you, and your state isn't very strong. So then you're more easily triggered. But just notice that. And then the rehearsal, the practice, the building of the muscle, that's what we have to do. And it's a bit like going to the gym, right? You have to turn up and you have to lift the weights. You don't get any stronger just by watching YouTube videos about it. Same with this, you actually have to put in some practice. Not a lot. Same as with the gym. If you go mental in the gym and lift things that you can't really cope with, pull a muscle, you can't go to the gym for 3 weeks. A little bit, often, build up, get stronger, build up, get stronger, increase your confidence, get stronger. Exactly the same with this.
Thank you. Next question that's coming. My attention is always on other people's reactions towards me. It gives me the feeling of watching what is happening around me and also feeling being watched. How can I shift this? What can I focus on instead?
Yeah, well, it's quite a good muscle that you've developed there. The thing now is to apply it to a slightly different focus. So you notice what you feel other people are thinking or reacting, how they're behaving towards you. Now notice how you're internally reacting to your reaction. There's something that when people come to retreats, meditation retreats, I'm actually up to Oxford tomorrow morning to a meditation retreat for the weekend. When people come to meditation retreats for the first time, one of the things that they notice is something which in all the meditation centers, we have a bit of music, a couple of minutes of music that plays every hour on the hour. It's called traffic control. I don't think it's the best word. It's more like traffic monitoring rather than traffic control. But this is the idea: is in that minute when the music plays, what you're doing is you're observing the traffic of your mind. One of the things that people often have as a misunderstanding around meditation is the idea that meditation means to stop your mind, to go blank, to go into kind of like a null state. And it's not. It's not about stopping your thoughts. It's about your relationship to your thoughts. It's not about stopping your feelings. It's about your relationship to your feelings. And so why traffic? Well, here's the idea is that if you go out onto a busy street, and there's lots of traffic now, motorway or a little circular road or whatever it might be. There's a lot of difference between standing on the pavement, sidewalk, if you're American, honoring today's date. If you're standing on the pavement or the sidewalk, watching the traffic go by, there can be trucks, there can be buses, bicycles, motorcycles, cars, everything, but you're observing it go by. If you are not standing on the sidewalk or the pavement, you step into the carriageway, into the road, you get run over. You get run over by a bicycle. You get run over by somebody on one of those mad motorized scooters that everyone seems to drive around at breakneck speed, right? The only difference is where you're standing. Are you standing in the flow of your thoughts and feelings, or are you standing back observing the flow of your thoughts and feelings? And so this is the practice. And this is the thing that people remember when they've come on a retreat. Ask them 3 months later, what's the thing you remember about the retreat? Oh, the traffic control. It's remembering to do it, remembering to observe my thinking and observe my feelings. Because as I start to do that, I realize that I have the capacity to step back behind what's going on in my inner space and not be run over by it, not be pulled by it, not be knocked over by it. That's really the whole practice. The whole practice is observing what is going on inside the self. And if I'm observing what's going on inside the self, when you start to learn to meditate, you start observing your thinking. And then I'm thinking about the shopping. I shouldn't be thinking about the shopping because I'm supposed to be meditating. Oh, look, I'm thinking that I shouldn't be thinking about the shopping because I'm thinking I should be meditating. Oh, look, I'm noticing that I'm judging my thinking has not been good because it's not doing the thing that I think I should be doing. Oh, look, I'm noticing that. I'm noticing, and all the time what you're doing is you're noticing what's going on. And every time you notice what's going on, you're stepping onto the pavement, you're stepping out of the traffic. So that's really what's required. And so for all of these issues, it really is that inner practice of watching what's going on, because when you watch what's going on, you're not caught up in what's going on. And initially, it's difficult to get that separation, but just like initially, it's difficult to lift weights. I mean, I remember I lost weight and got fit about 8 years ago. I bought myself some kettlebells, and they're 8 kilos. I'm like, God, God, this is how do I lift this thing up? It's like, oh, crikey, this is ridiculous. I now use 32 kilos, 4 times as much. What's the difference? Well, I've been doing it for 8 years. That's the same with this. It's like initially, I might feel one of the thoughts that gets in the way is, oh, I'm not very good at this meditation. I must be doing it wrong. Well, no, actually, just observe the thought, I must be doing it wrong. And then just in observing that thought, you're automatically doing it right because the 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 job is not to have different thoughts. The job is to have a different relationship to the thoughts. And when you have a different relationship to the thoughts, then the thoughts change automatically by themselves.
Thank you. Now, this is the final question. I know that many more questions are there, but let me start this one. How do you remain independent when, due to ill health, you are dependent on others?
So you might be dependent on a particular level. In a way, you could argue we're all dependent on the company that generates the electricity that comes down the wires to our houses so that we can charge our devices, so that we can join Zoom calls. So we're all dependent on one level or another, but we're all within certain situations and circumstances and relationships where within that context, we have the opportunity to practice the things that I've been describing this evening. We have the opportunity to be independent of the circumstances we're in, irrespective of what the circumstances are. And each of us feels that, yeah, but you don't know what my situation's like. Just as I said to Joyce, yeah, you don't know what it's like interacting with Austin. I have to deal with him every day. In the same way, we can easily convince ourselves that our situation is uniquely difficult. Probably the most inspiring example to counter that view is a guy called Viktor Frankl, who wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, many decades ago. He was someone who was imprisoned in two, possibly three, I think it was two, concentration camps during the war, including the Second World War, including Auschwitz. And a lot of people obviously suffered and died in those conditions. But he had a certain attitude towards this situation. And for some reason, he had this sense that after the war was over, he would help people to understand the human condition based on what he'd learned from the trauma and the difficulty of being in such a horrendous circumstance as that. And what he noticed was the people who didn't have some sort of sense that there's a purpose and an opportunity to learn, and I will learn and grow through this, they were the ones that gave up and succumbed to illness or died or whatever. And so he went on after the war to found a psychotherapeutic practice called logotherapy. And he said that ultimately you can have everything taken away from you except one thing, and that is your ability to choose your response to any situation. So this is what you see with people who've been in these extreme circumstances. Someone like him, a guy called Gerald Coffey, who was an American serviceman in the same kind of situation in Vietnam. What you find is that there are people who've been through those situations who see it as an opportunity to learn and grow, and therefore they learn and grow. The people who don't see it as an opportunity to learn and grow are the ones who end up with a difficult situation. And so I just like to, I know we're a bit over time, I just want to finish with this quote that I love. It's from George Bernard Shaw from a play that he wrote in 1903. I've got it on my phone here. He says, "This is the true joy in life, the being used for a purpose, recognized by yourself as a mighty one, the being thoroughly worn out before you are thrown on the scrap heap, the being a force of nature, this is the bit I love, instead of a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. Isn't that a lovely turn of phrase? Instead of a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. That's the difference. The difference is this sense that you can grow, and in growing, you become more able to contribute to life rather than looking for all the reasons why you can be unhappy. And that's a choice.
Geoff, it's been an absolute pleasure listening to you this evening and having you join us all the way from Cambridge. I'm looking forward to the day we can have you back in person, actually in Covent Garden. That would be wonderful.